The winter of 1943. The night is cold. Your breath hangs in the air. Your partner stands 20 meters away, rifle slung across his shoulder, stamping his feet against the frost. Everything is quiet, too quiet, and somewhere in that darkness, someone is watching you, holding a weapon designed to end your life without making a single sound. For the German soldiers occupying Europe during the Second World War, this was not paranoia. This was reality. Resistance fighters possessed tools that could kill from a distance, leave no acoustic signature, and vanish before anyone realized what had happened. The weapons responsible for this terror were not what you might imagine. The journey to discover what actually worked required intelligence agencies on both sides of the Atlantic to travel backward through history, dust off technology that belonged in castle armories, and ultimately learn a brutal lesson about why certain innovations fail no matter how clever they appear on paper. This is the story of how the Allies attempted to resurrect the crossbow for modern assassination work, why that experiment collapsed in spectacular fashion, and what replaced it to become one of the most feared covert instruments of the entire conflict. The impossible puzzle. By 1942, Allied intelligence agencies faced a problem that seemed to have no solution. Their agents operating behind enemy lines needed to eliminate targets without detection. Every available method came with serious drawbacks that could compromise entire networks. Consider the options available to an operative tasked with removing a German officer blocking a sabotage operation. Hand-to-hand methods like knives or strangulation required closing distance to within touching range. The Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, that legendary double-edged blade carried by commandos, could certainly dispatch a man efficiently, but reaching stabbing distance meant approaching an armed, trained soldier without being noticed. One wrong footstep, one creaking floorboard, and the mission would end with the operative dead or captured. Garats offered similar complications. The wire loop technique worked only when the target remained completely oblivious until the final moment. Any awareness, any peripheral glimpse of movement, and the advantage evaporated instantly. Firearms presented different challenges. Suppressor technology in the early 1940s could muffle a gunshot, but not silence it entirely. That reduced report would still echo through empty streets at 3 in the morning, bringing patrols converging on the location within minutes. Additionally, suppressors of that era degraded rapidly. After a few rounds, noise reduction dropped substantially, making the weapon progressively louder with each shot. What intelligence planners desperately wanted was something that combined knife-level silence with pistol-range standoff distance. A weapon that could neutralize a sentry from 30 yards without producing any sound that might reach human ears. The solution, certain American engineers believed, had been perfected centuries before gunpowder changed everything. Reaching into the past, medieval assassins had understood something that modern military planners were rediscovering. Crossbows killed without announcement. A quarrel traveling through darkness made no explosive report, no supersonic crack. The target simply dropped. By the time anyone noticed, the shooter had melted into shadows. This logic appealed to the Office of Strategic Services, America's wartime intelligence organization that would eventually evolve into the CIA. In late 1942, they formally commissioned their research division to investigate whether ancient projectile technology could be adapted for clandestine warfare. The specifications they demanded were ambitious, bordering on fantasy. Researchers were instructed to achieve velocities approaching 1,000 feet per second, while maintaining complete acoustic stealth. They wanted reload times under 30 seconds, total concealment capability, and lethal accuracy to 30 yards. The velocity target was quickly recognized as physically impossible for any mechanical propulsion system small enough to hide under a coat, but the underlying requirement remained serious enough to justify substantial investment. Overseeing this peculiar research program was Stanley Lovell, a Boston-based chemist serving as the OSS Director of Special Projects. His colleagues affectionately nicknamed him Professor Moriarty after the criminal genius from Arthur Conan Doyle's detective stories. The comparison was appropriate. Lovell had visited British special operations facilities specifically to study what he termed unconventional methodologies. He returned convinced that shadow warfare required tools that conventional military thinking would never produce. The team Lovell assembled called themselves the Sandeman Club. Though official documentation labeled them Division 9, these engineers quickly realized that no traditional crossbow design could satisfy the requirement. Medieval weapons were bulky, heavy, and required tremendous physical strength to draw. A knight's arbalist might pierce armor at impressive distances, but no spy could carry such an apparatus through occupied territory without arousing suspicion. They needed to reinvent the concept entirely. Rubber bands and killing bolts. After extensive experimentation with various propulsion mechanisms, the Division 19 team settled on an unexpected power source. Instead of conventional bow limbs constructed from wood, steel, or fiberglass, their weapon would harness elastic energy stored in vulcanized rubber. Dozens of bands working in parallel could generate substantial force while remaining mechanically simple and virtually maintenance-free. By early 1943, they had produced their first functional prototype. They called it the Little Joe, borrowing terminology from dice games as an ironic reference to the weapon's compact dimensions. There was nothing humorous about its purpose. The device that emerged from their workshop looked like nothing in any historical collection. Its frame was cast from heat-treated aluminum, shaped roughly like a pistol grip, with a rectangular housing mounted above. 50 rubber bands, treated with graphite at their contact points to reduce friction, provided the propulsive force. Technically, the mechanism operated more like an oversized slingshot than a traditional crossbow, but the fundamental principle remained identical. Store mechanical energy silent, release it to drive a projectile into flesh. Performance testing revealed impressive capabilities for such a small package. The complete weapon weighed roughly 2 pounds. Overall length measured 13 inches with an 8-inch height profile. Trained operators could fire 4 projectiles per minute with consistent 6-inch groupings at 20 yards. The ammunition consisted of 8-ounce bolts featuring broadhead metal tips, wooden shafts, and genuine feather fletching. According to documented trials, these projectiles could pass entirely through a human torso at 30 yards. Most critically, acoustic measurements recorded the Little Joe producing approximately 72 decibels when discharged. To contextualize that figure, ordinary conversation registers around 60 decibels. The Little Joe was measurably quieter than most suppressed firearms of its era, approaching the threshold where ambient environmental noise might mask it entirely. Encouraged by these results, the development team immediately began work on larger variants. The Big Joe 5 was a shoulder-fired platform weighing 10 pounds, utilizing 300 rubber rings divided equally between 2 sides. This arrangement created a draw weight exceeding 500 pounds, far beyond what any human arm could manage. Operators instead used a windlass mechanism, cranking the bands into firing position before each shot. The Big Joe launched 14-inch aluminum darts, accurately to 80 yards. It could also fire specialized incendiary projectiles to 200 yards, potentially allowing saboteurs to ignite enemy facilities without any gunshot betraying their position. A third variant, designated William Tell, represented a middle ground between the compact assassination tool and the extended-range platform. Testing conducted in mid-1945 found it the quietest of all 3 designs, registering only 66 decibels. Unfortunately, the conflict ended before comprehensive evaluation could be completed, and no examples are known to have survived. Crossing the Atlantic, production figures reveal how the military establishment actually viewed these experimental weapons. Across all variants, total manufacture numbered only in the dozens. These were laboratory curiosities being evaluated, not operational equipment being deployed. In 1943, American intelligence shared their work with their British counterparts. At least one complete Little Joe assembly, including ammunition, was transferred to the Special Operations Executive for independent assessment. If any organization would embrace medieval killing technology, it was SOE. Created by Winston Churchill's direct order to set Europe ablaze, this clandestine agency operated entirely outside conventional military structures. Their mandate covered sabotage, subversion, and assassination across occupied territories. They reported not to generals but to the Minister of Economic Warfare. SOE maintained secret development facilities throughout Britain, most notably Station 9 at a country estate called the Fife. The engineers working there had already demonstrated remarkable creativity in weaponizing everyday objects. They produced explosive devices disguised as lumps of coal designed to detonate when shoveled into locomotive fireboxes. They created rats packed with plastic explosive, intended for German boiler rooms. They developed tire-piercing devices incapacitating chemical agents and time-delay detonators concealed within mundane items. A modernized crossbow seemed perfectly aligned with their unconventional mission. The specialists had already proved they could convert virtually anything into a weapon. Ancient projectile technology updated with modern materials appeared tailor-made for their requirements. However, the British evaluation team had already been investigating the silent elimination problem themselves. Their conclusions pointed in an entirely different direction. The fatal flaw. Field testing exposed a fundamental weakness that laboratory measurements had concealed. Captain Homer Williams of the Alamo Scouts, an American Special Reconnaissance Unit operating across the Pacific Theater, conducted realistic evaluations of the Little Joe under operational conditions. His assessment proved devastating to the program. Williams confirmed that the weapon performed exactly as advertised regarding power and precision. It could absolutely drive a bolt through a human body at the specified engagement distance. The projectile would certainly inflict a fatal wound. The problem was what happened during the interval between impact and death. In Williams' documented evaluation, he noted that a crossbow projectile, unlike a bullet entering the brain, did not produce immediate incapacitation. His precise words described how a target could flop around like a chicken with its head cut off, before expiring, potentially creating significant commotion during the process. This observation terminated any serious consideration of crossbows for operational deployment. Imagine the scenario these weapons were intended to address. An SOE operative approaches a rural checkpoint after midnight. Two German soldiers are on watch. Both must be eliminated silently before a downed Allied airman can be moved through the area to safety. The agent fires at the first guard. The bolt strikes perfectly. The wound will certainly prove fatal. But the German does not simply collapse. Instead, he shrieks in agony, staggers backward, knocks over equipment, alerts his partner. The second sentry turns, sees his comrade dying with a medieval projectile protruding from his chest, and raises his weapon. The mission is compromised. The operative is killed or captured. The airman never reaches the coast. For assassination purposes, eventual lethality was meaningless. What mattered was instantaneous incapacitation. A weapon that killed reliably but slowly was actively worse than having no weapon at all. It endangered everyone involved in the operation while guaranteeing mission failure. Williams recommended that suppressed pistols remained more practical and effective for clandestine elimination tasks. Neither American nor British intelligence adopted crossbow technology for operational deployment. The weapon that actually worked. British engineers had actually solved the silent killing problem before the American crossbow program even began. In 1942, specialists at Station 9 developed an instrument so secret that its existence remained classified for decades after the war concluded. They called it the well rod. The designation followed British convention, derived from the facility where development occurred. But the weapon itself looked like nothing that belonged in any firearms catalogue. Disassembled, a well rod resembled an ordinary bicycle pump. This was deliberate engineering. If German security forces searched a captured agent, the components would not immediately register as weaponry. The barrel section appeared to be innocent mechanical equipment. Assembled, the well rod became a roughly foot-long tube with a minimal grip and trigger mechanism. No external hammer, no visible ammunition storage, nothing to identify it as a lethal instrument to casual examination. Revolutionary suppression technology made the well rod exceptional. The barrel was enclosed within a series of rubber discs that sealed around each bullet as it passed through the bore, trapping the expanding propellant gases that normally create a gunshot's distinctive acoustic signature. The action was manually operated, eliminating any mechanical cycling noise that semi-automatic designs produced. When fresh, these suppression elements reduced the well rod's report to approximately 73 decibels. Contemporary descriptions compared the sound to snapping fingers. When pressed directly against a target's skull, even that minimal noise was absorbed by the contact point. Two primary variants existed. The Mark I chambered 9mm parabellum, the standard German pistol cartridge, allowing agents to resupply from captured enemy stockpiles. The Mark II series utilized .32 ACP, a smaller round that was easier to suppress while remaining lethal at contact distances. Magazine capacity ranged from 6 to 8 rounds depending on configuration. What the well rod delivered that crossbows could not was absolute certainty. A 9mm projectile entering the brain produced instant cessation of all motor function. No screaming, no thrashing, no commotion. The target dropped and the operative withdrew. The suppression elements degraded after 10 to 15 discharges, but assassination missions rarely required more than 1 or 2 carefully aimed shots. Replacement parts could restore full capability for subsequent operations.
Production tells the story.
Manufacturing numbers illustrate the actual military utility assessment of these competing solutions. Americans produced perhaps 50 crossbow prototypes across all variants. These were experimental devices undergoing evaluation, never intended for mass issue. British factories manufactured well roads in the thousands. Exact production figures remain disputed in historical literature, with estimates ranging from under 3,000 to exceeding 10,000. Depending on which archival sources are consulted, but the magnitude difference is unmistakable. One weapon system entered actual service, the other remained confined to laboratories and testing ranges. German intelligence recovered well roads from resistance caches scattered across occupied Europe. Otto Skorzeny SS Special Operations Units were documented carrying captured examples, demonstrating German interest in understanding and potentially replicating the technology. The weapon accomplished precisely what its designers intended. It killed without sound. It killed without delay. It killed without warning. The mythology question. The crossbow program left almost no trace in historical records specifically because it never advanced beyond experimental stages. Mark Murray Flutter, senior curator at the Royal Armouries, stated publicly in 2020 that no documented account of operational deployment has ever been discovered. Researchers examining both American OSS and British SOE archives have located extensive development and testing documentation but nothing confirming field use. This archival silence creates historical ambiguity. Did operatives ever actually carry these weapons into occupied territory? Were units manufactured and stockpiled but never issued? Did missions occur that remained classified even 8 decades afterward? Or were the weapons simply abandoned once testing exposed their fundamental inadequacy? The secrecy surrounding wartime intelligence operations complicates any definitive conclusion. MRD Foote, the official SOA historian, noted that substantial portions of organizational files were destroyed after the conflict concluded, some accidentally, some intentionally. Documentation that might have recorded crossbow deployment, if any occurred, may simply no longer exist. The most accurate assessment based on currently available evidence is that Little Joe and Big Joe remained experimental prototypes that never progressed into operational service. Popular imagery depicting SOE assassins stalking German sentries with modernized crossbows appears to represent mythology rather than documented history. What remained? Single Little Joe is confirmed to exist in any public collection today. In 2005, British Ministry of Defence personnel discovered it during storage inventory and transferred the artifact to the Royal Armouries in Leeds, where it currently remains displayed alongside 5 original projectiles. 2 Big Joe 5 platforms are believed to survive in private ownership, though their locations are not publicly verified. Most prototypes were scrapped or discarded as surplus following the war. A handful may exist undocumented in private collections, but the archival trail grows cold. What lessons does the crossbow experiment offer regarding wartime innovation? Perhaps that desperation inspires creativity, but creativity alone does not determine outcomes. The engineers who conceived Little Joe and Big Joe demonstrated genuine ingenuity. They adapted ancient mechanical principles using contemporary materials, rubber band propulsion, aluminum construction, precision manufactured projectiles. The weapons functioned exactly according to specifications. They were accurate, powerful, and genuinely quiet. But warfare does not reward elegant engineering. It rewards practical results. And the crossbow, despite all its cleverness, could not solve the core problem of silent elimination. A weapon that permits its target time to raise an alarm is not truly silent. It is merely quiet. That distinction destroyed the program's future. British engineering approached the problem differently. The well rod was aesthetically unimpressive, mechanically awkward, limited to perhaps a dozen shots before requiring suppressor maintenance, but it accomplished the mission. It killed instantly, It killed silently. It was concealable, deniable, and effective. When German soldiers across occupied Europe learned that resistance fighters possessed weapons capable of killing without any audible warning, they were not imagining crossbow bolts whistling through darkness. They were imagining that strange tubular pistol their intelligence services had recovered from captured supply caches, the weapon that made no sound, the weapon that left no chance to cry out. The crossbow program represents something valuable in military history, precisely because it failed. Not every clever idea deserves implementation. Not every technical achievement translates into battlefield utility. The little Joe sitting in its museum display case is a monument to solutions that seemed perfect until reality intervened. Medieval technology had a place in development workshops and exhibition halls. It did not belong in the shadow war being fought across occupied Europe, proving that required brilliant engineers, expensive prototypes, and rigorous field evaluation. Sometimes the most important outcome of a weapons program is the knowledge that the weapon should never be produced. British intelligence learned that lesson. The crossbow stayed in storage, the well-rod went to war, and German sentries across Europe learned to fear a sound they would never hear. The psychology of invisible death. Understanding why the well-rod terrified German occupation forces requires examining what happens to soldiers who cannot identify their enemy or predict attack methods. Traditional combat, however brutal, follows recognizable patterns. Gunfire announces itself, artillery screams through the air, explosions leave craters and debris. Soldiers can orient themselves toward threats, take cover, return fire. There exists a framework for response. Silent assassination weapons destroyed that framework entirely. German military police and security forces stationed across France, Belgium, Norway, and the Netherlands faced an enemy that struck without warning and vanished without trace. A sentry might be speaking with his partner at 11 o'clock. By 11:15, that partner would discover a corpse slumped against a wall, killed by a wound that made no sound audible from 20 meters away. No shot heard, no attacker seen, just death arriving from nowhere. This unpredictability corroded morale in ways conventional combat never could. Soldiers understand trading fire with an opponent. They do not understand colleagues dying in complete silence while standing watch on quiet streets. The randomness created persistent anxiety that no amount of alertness could resolve. You cannot defend against what you cannot perceive approaching. German intelligence reports from occupied territories documented growing unease among garrison troops. Sentries requested permission to patrol in larger groups. Guard rotations became more frequent, but shorter in duration, because soldiers could not maintain vigilance against invisible threats for extended periods. Some units reported sleep disturbances and heightened startle responses among personnel assigned to isolated posts. The well-rod did not need to kill thousands to achieve strategic effect. It needed to kill enough that every German soldier in occupied Europe understood death might arrive without announcement. That psychological burden spread far beyond the actual casualty figures. Training the shadow warriors, possessing silent weapons meant nothing without operatives trained to employ them effectively. Both SOE and OSS established specialized programs teaching agents how to eliminate targets without detection. British training facilities scattered across Scotland provided the most intensive instruction. Locations like a Rissig House on the western Scottish coast became finishing schools for assassination. Recruits arrived, knowing conventional warfare. They departed understanding something far darker. Instruction covered approach techniques, timing selection, and escape routing. Students learned to study target patterns for days before acting, identifying moments of maximum vulnerability and minimum witness probability. They practiced moving through darkness without creating sound, controlling breathing to remain undetected at close distances, and maintaining emotional composure during the killing moment itself. Weapons training emphasized the well-rod's particular characteristics. Unlike conventional pistols, the manually operated action required deliberate cycling between shots. This was actually advantageous for assassination work, since it eliminated any possibility of accidental double firing that might produce unexpected noise. Students practiced the smooth, unhurried motion needed to chamber subsequent rounds without creating metallic clicking sounds. Direct contact shots received particular attention. Pressing the muzzle firmly against the target's skull before firing achieved maximum suppression, while guaranteeing instant incapacitation. This technique required approaching to touching distance, which demanded exceptional nerve and skill. Instructors emphasized that hesitation at the final moment was more dangerous than the approach itself. Operatives who paused while in contact range gave targets opportunity to react. The psychological preparation may have been more difficult than the physical training. Taking human life at intimate distance, feeling the body collapse against yours, then maintaining composure to complete exfiltration required mental conditioning that many recruits found challenging. Some candidates who excelled at sabotage work proved unsuitable for assassination assignments. The skills were not automatically transferable. What the Germans learned: captured well routes provided German intelligence services with valuable information about Allied suppression technology. Analysis of recovered weapons revealed construction details that Axis engineers attempted to replicate with mixed success. The rubber wipe suppression system was elegantly simple, but required precise manufacturing tolerances. German wartime industry, increasingly strained by Allied bombing campaigns and material shortages, struggled to reproduce the tight specifications needed for effective sound reduction. Copies were manufactured but reportedly performed significantly worse than British originals. More concerning for German security forces was understanding how many such weapons might be circulating through resistance networks. Each captured well rod represented one known unit removed from opposition hands, but how many remained undiscovered? How many caches had never been located? The uncertainty was itself a weapon. German countermeasures focused on reducing opportunities rather than defeating the technology directly. Checkpoint procedures were modified to minimize isolated sentry positions. Lighting was improved around sensitive installations. Random patrol timing was introduced to prevent resistance observers from predicting guard movements with precision. These defensive adaptations consumed resources and personnel that might otherwise have supported frontline operations. Every additional soldier assigned to occupation security was one fewer soldier facing Allied armies advancing from east and west. Silent assassination weapons achieved effects far beyond their direct casualties by forcing defensive resource allocation throughout occupied territories. The forgotten alternatives. The crossbow was not the only unconventional approach considered for silent elimination work. Allied development programs explored numerous concepts that never reached operational deployment. Compressed air weapons received substantial investigation. Air rifles could theoretically launch projectiles without any chemical propellant signature, eliminating both sound and muzzle flash. Testing revealed insufficient velocity for reliable lethality at useful distances. The pneumatic systems powerful enough to drive projectiles through human tissue required bulky pressure vessels, incompatible with concealment requirements. Spring-powered launchers were evaluated and rejected for similar reasons. Mechanical springs capable of generating lethal velocities required physical dimensions that prevented practical concealment. Smaller systems lacked killing power. The engineering compromise that crossbow developers attempted, using rubber bands as a middle path between traditional springs and pneumatic systems, represented genuine innovation even though the final product proved operationally unsuitable. Poison delivery systems attracted attention from researchers seeking alternatives to mechanical killing methods. Theoretically, a small dart or needle carrying sufficient toxin could eliminate targets without any immediate indication of attack. Practical difficulty included uncertain dosing, variable absorption rates depending on hit location, and the fundamental problem that crossbow testing had already identified. Any method permitting the target time to raise alarm before incapacitation defeated the operational purpose entirely. The most exotic proposals never progressed beyond conceptual discussions. Directed energy concepts, acoustic disruption devices, and various chemical incapacitants were briefly considered and abandoned as impractical, given wartime technological constraints. The well rod succeeded precisely because it represented incremental improvement on proven firearms technology, rather than revolutionary departure into uncharted territory. Legacy and the shadows. The well rod remained in British military and intelligence inventories long after German surrender. Its operational lifespan extended through decades of Cold War confrontation and post-colonial conflicts. Modified versions reportedly saw service during the Malayan Emergency, the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and various undocumented intelligence operations throughout the latter 20th century. Design principles established by Station 9 engineers influenced suppressor development for generations. Modern integrated suppressors used by special operations forces worldwide Trace conceptual lineage to those rubber wipe systems devised in a country house workshop during wartime emergency. The quest for silent weapons never ended. It simply evolved as technology advanced. Contemporary suppressed firearms achieved noise reduction that would have seemed miraculous to 1940s engineers. Material science, acoustic modeling, and precision manufacturing have produced systems capable of reducing gunshot reports to levels genuinely difficult to locate from moderate distances. Yet the fundamental challenge remains identical to what SOE planners confronted 8 decades ago. How do you eliminate a threat without announcing your presence? The crossbow concept has never entirely disappeared from special operations discussions. Periodic revivals occur whenever planners seek weapons with zero acoustic signature. Modern compound crossbows using carbon fiber components and precision-manufactured bolts significantly outperform anything Division 19 engineers could have imagined. Yet the core limitation Williams identified during Pacific theater testing persists. Projectile weapons that do not destroy central nervous system function immediately permit target response before incapacitation. This is why firearms remain dominant despite their acoustic disadvantages. The milliseconds between bullet impact and brain cessation are insufficient for any meaningful alarm. That interval cannot be shortened for mechanical projectile weapons regardless of velocity or accuracy improvements. The museum piece speaks. Visitors to the Royal Armouries who pause before the Little Joe display case encounter an artifact that tells multiple stories simultaneously. It speaks to wartime desperation that drove intelligent people toward ancient solutions for modern problems. It demonstrates the gap between theoretical elegance and operational reality. It reminds observers that failure often teaches more than success. The 5 bolts displayed alongside the weapon will never strike flesh. They exist now as historical curiosities, conversation pieces for guided tours and academic papers. The engineers who designed them are gone. The officers who evaluated them are gone. The war that inspired them ended nearly 80 years ago, but the questions that Crossbow program wrestled with remain relevant. How do we solve problems when conventional approaches prove inadequate? How do we evaluate promising concepts against real-world requirements? How do we recognize when creativity has produced something impressive but ultimately useless? Every military research program, every intelligence development effort, every attempt to gain advantage through technological innovation faces these same challenges. The specific hardware changes. The underlying difficulties persist. Somewhere in classified development facilities today, engineers are almost certainly working on concepts that will prove equally impractical when subjected to operational testing. That is not failure of imagination or competence. That is how progress actually functions. Most ideas do not work. Discovering which ones do requires building prototypes, conducting evaluations, and accepting negative results as valuable information rather than wasted effort. The Little Joe was never a wasted effort. It was an answered question, and the answer, though disappointing to its creators, cleared the path for solutions that actually functioned. German guards across occupied Europe never faced crossbow-armed assassins emerging from midnight shadows. They faced something far more terrifying. A weapon so quiet it registered below ambient sound levels. A weapon so concealable it looked like bicycle equipment. A weapon so effective that survival statistics dropped to zero once an operative reached engagement distance. The crossbow might have haunted German imaginations if propaganda had spread its existence. The well rod haunted their reality, and reality in warfare is the only thing that ultimately matters. If you found this journey through secret weapon development compelling, subscribe and enable notifications. Every day, we explore another hidden chapter from the shadow war that shaped our world.